On July 26, 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981, declaring that there shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin. It was a revolutionary decree that would end segregation in the United States military. But orders and implementation are different things. By June 1950, when North Korean forces poured across the 38th parallel, the American military remained largely segregated in practice. All black units still served under mostly white officers. Black soldiers still faced discrimination in assignments and promotions. Integration existed on paper, but not in the field. Korea would change that. In the desperate, brutal fighting on the Korean peninsula, necessity would accomplish what morality alone could not. When commanders needed every rifle they could find, skin color became irrelevant. When black soldiers proved their worth in integrated units, the old arguments for segregation crumbled. Korea became the crucible where American military integration was forged under fire. This is the story of the Korean War, America's forgotten war, and the African-American soldiers who fought it while simultaneously fighting for their place in an integrated military. The situation in 1950, segregation's last stand. When war erupted in Korea, the U.S. Army still maintained all black units, the 24th Infantry Regiment, the 159th Field Artillery Battalion, and various support companies. The Navy had largely integrated, though black sailors still faced discrimination in assignments and advancement. The Air Force was moving fastest toward integration, but old attitudes died hard. The Army's resistance to integration was rooted in the same racist assumptions that had defined military policy for generations. Senior officers, many of them Southerners, argued that integration would destroy unit cohesion, that white soldiers wouldn't follow black officers, and that black soldiers performed better under white leadership. Despite evidence from World War II proving otherwise, the Army clung to segregation. But the Korean War created conditions that made segregation unsustainable. The war began as a disaster for American forces. The undermanned and under-equipped 8th Army was pushed into the Pusan perimeter, fighting desperately to avoid being driven off the Korean peninsula entirely. Units took heavy casualties and needed immediate replacements. The traditional system, where black replacements went only to black units, couldn't keep pace with battlefield needs. Commanders facing extinction made pragmatic decisions. Lieutenant General Matthew Ridgway, who took command of 8th Army in December 1950, saw segregation as a military inefficiency that cost lives. If a white infantry company needed riflemen and black soldiers were available, Ridgway wanted them integrated immediately. Combat effectiveness mattered more than Jim Crow customs. This wasn't idealism, it was survival, but the result was revolutionary. The 24th Infantry Regiment, bearing the burden. The 24th Infantry Regiment entered the Korean War, carrying the weight of history and prejudice. This all-black regiment traced its lineage back to 1869, had fought in the Indian Wars, charged up San Juan Hill, and served in the Pacific during World War II. Now it would fight America's last major segregated ground combat action. The 24th arrived in Korea in July 1950 as part of the 25th Infantry Division. They were immediately thrown into combat around the Pusan perimeter, the desperate defensive line holding back North Korean forces from overrunning South Korea entirely. Their first major action came at Yekon on July 20, 1950. The 24th Infantry became the first U.S. unit to defeat North Korean forces in battle, recapturing the town in a hard-fought engagement. It should have been celebrated. Instead, racist Army leadership focused on alleged failures, not successes. The regiment fought through brutal battles at Sangju, along the Naktong River, and in the breakout from Pusan. They endured everything Korea threw at soldiers: scorching summer heat, freezing winter cold, mountainous terrain, and a determined enemy. Private First Class William Thompson became the first African American to receive the Medal of Honor since the Spanish-American War. On August 6, 1950, near Haman, Thompson's machine gun position came under intense North Korean attack. As his squad withdrew, Thompson provided covering fire alone. He was wounded, but continued firing. When the enemy closed in, He refused to retreat, fighting until killed at his position. His sacrifice allowed his squad to escape. Yet despite such heroism, the 24th Infantry Regiment became controversial. Some reports, often from white officers who commanded black enlisted men, alleged problems with discipline and combat effectiveness. These reports were seized upon by segregationists as proof that black soldiers couldn't fight. The truth was far more complex. The 24th Infantry had problems, but they were problems of leadership, training, and systemic racism, not inherent racial deficiencies. The regiment often received the worst equipment and least experienced replacements. Many white officers assigned to the 24th viewed it as a career dead end and provided poor leadership. When soldiers are poorly led, inadequately equipped, and told they're inferior, performance suffers. More objective observers noted that companies and platoons with good leadership performed excellently. Black non-commissioned officers often provided the leadership and cohesion that white officers failed to deliver. And in countless small unit actions, soldiers of the 24th fought with courage and skill. Sergeant Cornelius Charlton embodied the regiment's true spirit. On June 2, 1951, near Chippo-Ri, Charlton led his platoon in 3 separate assaults on a heavily fortified hill. Wounded in the chest during the second assault, he refused evacuation. When his platoon's officer was wounded, Charlton took command and led the third assault himself. He was shot again, but continued forward, rallying his men until reaching the crest where he planted the American flag before being mortally wounded. He posthumously received the Medal of Honor. The 24th Infantry Regiment was disbanded in October 1951, officially for tactical reasons, but really because segregation was ending. Its soldiers were reassigned to integrated units. The regiment's reputation had been unfairly tarnished, and it would take decades for historians to properly acknowledge its service. Integration by necessity. The transformation. While the 24th Infantry fought as a segregated unit, integration was happening organically across Korea. Battlefield necessity overrode policy and prejudice. In the desperate winter of 1950-51, after Chinese forces entered the war and sent the 8th Army reeling southward, units were shattered and reformed constantly. In this chaos, segregation became impossible to maintain. Replacements were assigned wherever needed. Soldiers fought beside whoever was in the next foxhole, regardless of race. Lieutenant General Matthew Ridgway actively promoted integration. In March 1951, he authorized commanders to integrate their units at will. By mid-1951, most frontline infantry companies were substantially integrated. The 2nd Infantry Division began assigning black soldiers throughout its regiments rather than concentrating them in separate units. The results were dramatic. Integrated units reported better morale than segregated ones. White soldiers who fought alongside black comrades came to respect them as individuals rather than stereotypes. Black soldiers performed better when they felt they were full members of their units rather than second-class soldiers in segregated outfits. Combat effectiveness improved. Project Clear, an Army study conducted during the war, documented these changes. Researchers found that white soldiers who served in integrated units overwhelmingly supported integration, while those in segregated units remained prejudiced. Experience eroded racism in ways that orders alone never could. First Lieutenant Charles Bussey, commanding the 77th Engineer Combat Company, provided a telling example. His all-black unit fought as infantry during the desperate early days around Pusan. Later, as integration proceeded, his company was integrated with white soldiers. Bussey noted that integrated units functioned more smoothly, with less racial tension than in segregated ones, because soldiers judged each other on performance, not preconceptions. Fighter pilots and sailors. Integration in other services. While the Army struggled with integration on the ground, the Air Force embraced it more readily. The Air Force had become an independent service in 1947 and saw integration as part of its modern identity. Captain Daniel "Chappie" James flew 101 combat missions in Korea, becoming one of the most accomplished fighter pilots of the war. James would later become the first African-American 4-star general in U.S. military history. In Korea, he flew F-51 Mustangs and F-80 Shooting Stars, engaging in ground attack missions and aerial combat. The integrated Air Force squadrons of Korea bore little resemblance to the segregated squadrons of World War II. Ensign Jesse Brown became the Navy's first black carrier pilot, flying F-4U Corsairs from the USS Leyte. On December 4, 1950, Brown's plane was hit by anti-aircraft fire during a close air support mission near Chosin Reservoir. He crash-landed in mountainous terrain in freezing conditions. Lieutenant Thomas Hudner, a white pilot, deliberately crashed his own plane nearby in an attempt to rescue Brown, but Brown was trapped and succumbed to his injuries. Hudner received the Medal of Honor for his heroic rescue attempt, a powerful testament to how combat forged bonds across racial lines. Brown posthumously received the Distinguished Flying Cross. The Navy, which had fully integrated by 1950, found that its racial problems diminished significantly once segregation ended. Ships operated more efficiently when assignment was based on skill rather than skin color. The old argument that integration would harm effectiveness proved false. The harsh realities, Korea's brutal warfare. Korea was a vicious war, regardless of race. African American soldiers endured the same hardships as all who fought there, perhaps the worst combat conditions American soldiers had faced since the Civil War. The summer of 1950 brought searing heat, dust, and disease. The winter of 1950-51 was one of the coldest on record, with temperatures dropping to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Frostbite caused as many casualties as enemy fire. Soldiers fought in mountainous terrain, where every position had to be taken by infantry assault. The Chinese intervention in November 1950 brought human wave attacks, masses of Chinese soldiers attacking in overwhelming numbers, often at night, using bugles and whistles to coordinate. The fighting around Chosin Reservoir and during the Chinese Spring Offensive was particularly brutal. African American soldiers were in the thick of every major battle. They fought at Incheon, the Pusan Perimeter, Chosin Reservoir, Heartbreak Ridge, Pork Chop Hill, and countless unnamed hills that saw vicious combat. Staff Sergeant Mac Jordan, serving with the 2nd Infantry Division, earned the Distinguished Service Cross for heroism at the Battle of Twin Tunnels in February 1951. When his position was overrun by Chinese forces, Jordan held his ground alone, killing numerous enemy soldiers and allowing his unit to reorganize. Stories like Jordan's were repeated thousands of times, individual acts of courage by black soldiers that slowly changed white soldiers' perceptions. Prisoners of war faced particular challenges. The approximately 600 African American POWs held by North Korea and China were subjected to intense propaganda efforts. Communist interrogators told black POWs they were fighting for a racist country that didn't value them. Some of this propaganda was effective. A handful of black soldiers chose to remain in China after the armistice, though the vast majority remained loyal despite horrific treatment. The medical corps and support units, saving lives. While combat soldiers fought, black medical personnel saved lives across Korea. The integration of medical units proved particularly successful, as the army couldn't afford to segregate expertise when soldiers' lives hung in the balance. Black surgeons, nurses, and medics served throughout Korea, often treating casualties regardless of race. MASH, Mobile Army Surgical Hospital units, pioneered rapid battlefield surgery, and black medical personnel were crucial to these innovations. The techniques developed in Korea, particularly in trauma surgery and battlefield triage, revolutionized military medicine. Combat medics faced enemy fire to reach wounded soldiers. They worked under impossible conditions, treating traumatic injuries with limited supplies in freezing or scorching weather. Black medics like Private First Class Herbert K. Pililau earned the Distinguished Service Cross for heroism under fire. Pililau, serving with the 8th Cavalry Regiment, single-handedly held off enemy attackers while treating wounded soldiers, ultimately giving his life to protect casualties. Transportation units, engineer battalions, and supply companies, many with significant numbers of black soldiers, kept the war effort running. They built roads through mountains, maintained supply lines despite enemy harassment, and performed the unglamorous but essential work that enabled combat operations. Coming home, a different America? Korean War veterans returned to an America in transition. The war ended in July 1953, at almost the exact moment the civil rights movement was accelerating. The Supreme Court's Brown v. Board of Education decision came in May 1954. The Montgomery bus boycott began in December 1955. The world these veterans returned to was beginning to change. Unlike World War II veterans who returned to unchanged segregation, Korean War veterans found a society starting to question Jim Crow. The military they had served in was now integrated, proof that racial barriers could fall. Some veterans became active in the civil rights movement, applying their military discipline and leadership to the struggle for equality. But change was gradual and uneven. Southern states engaged in massive resistance to integration. Violence against Black Americans continued. Economic opportunities remained limited. Veterans used their GI Bill benefits, but many still faced discrimination in education and employment. The experience of military integration did change attitudes, particularly among white veterans. Men who had fought beside Black soldiers in Korea came home with different perspectives. They had seen courage and competence firsthand. While some reverted to old prejudices, many became more open to integration in civilian life. For Black veterans, Korea confirmed something they had learned in World War II. They could compete and excel when given equal opportunity. The military had proven integration worked. Now the question was whether civilian America would follow the military's lead.
The legacy: integration's proving ground. The Korean War's contribution to racial equality in America is often overlooked, overshadowed by World War II and Vietnam. But Korea was the war where integration actually happened, where policy became practice, where the American military transformed from a Jim Crow institution to an integrated force.
By 1954, the Army had completely disbanded its all-Black units. Every soldier was assigned based on need and capability, not race. The change wasn't perfect. Discrimination in promotions and assignments continued, but the formal structure of segregation was gone. This military integration preceded and influenced civilian integration. The military provided a model, proof that integration worked, that it enhanced rather than harmed organizational effectiveness. Civil rights advocates could point to the military as evidence that segregation was unnecessary and harmful. The soldiers who fought in Korea, both Black and white, had experienced integration in the most demanding circumstances imaginable. They had shared foxholes, depended on each other for survival, and learned that courage and character aren't determined by skin color. These lessons didn't transform everyone, but they influenced a generation. African Americans had fought in every American war since the Revolution, but Korea was different. It was the first war where they fought as fully integrated members of the armed forces. Future conflicts would see Black generals, admirals, and senior officers in positions that would have been unimaginable in 1950. The Korean War veterans helped pave the way for figures like Colin Powell, the first African-American chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Secretary of State, who would serve in Vietnam. They demonstrated that integration strengthened rather than weakened the military. Today, the Korean War is called the Forgotten War, and the contributions of African-American soldiers are doubly forgotten. But they shouldn't be. The Black soldiers who fought in Korea's brutal mountains and freezing winters did more than defend South Korea. They advanced freedom at home. They proved that integration works. They demolished racist myths about Black combat capability. They showed that America's military could lead the way toward equality. In the frozen hills of Korea, under fire from an implacable enemy, American soldiers learned a simple truth. The soldier next to you is your brother, regardless of race. It was a lesson learned in blood, written in sacrifice, and paid for with lives. The veterans of Korea deserve to be remembered, not as footnotes, but as pioneers who fought two battles simultaneously, one against communist aggression and one against segregation in their own ranks. They won both. Their service stands as a testament to courage, perseverance, and the transformative power of shared sacrifice. In the Forgotten War, they created a legacy that would never be forgotten by those who understand what they accomplished. The integration of the American military began in Korea, and with it began a new chapter in American history,